Hello, and welcome to my non-spoiler review for the first 6 episodes of House of the Dragon, where I have a surprising amount of interesting things to say about this show. I really like this show, in fact, and I'm excited to walk you through my experience, again with no spoilers, of watching the first 6 episodes. I'm surprised at how much we actually have to talk about, and I know this show has not been on a lot of your radars, or some of you have already written it off, but I hope you'll stick around and listen to what I have to say, because again, as I said, there's some surprisingly cool stuff to discuss here. And as a big fan of history, even a fictional history like this show, I'm having a really good time. All right, so, and also the history of television. And that's where we start our discussion. Way back in 2011, can you believe it's been a decade? A little over a decade, Game of Thrones debuted on HBO, a very cleverly crafted soap opera full of action, VFX, nudity, and shocking surprises. It was a slow burn. The Red Wedding, for instance, wasn't until the end of season 3, but HBO at that time was able to do a slow burn because this was before Netflix even started doing original programming in 2013 with House of Cards. That's how long ago this was, although that just goes to show you how, relatively speaking, in terms of how long TV has been around, how fast streaming has exploded and changed the game. Enough that Game of Thrones could predate it and now find itself having to struggle with House of the Dragon to compete in this new age. Oh, I love it. Now, of course, the streaming landscape is very different, far more competitive, moving at a much faster pace. You have a very limited window now to grab an audience's attention. And House of the Dragon, of course, is betting on being part of the Game of Thrones universe, albeit a prequel, 172 years before Daenerys Targaryen. That's how they start. And you're like, that's a ridiculously long time before Daenerys Targaryen. And I'm surprised how many of the buildings and sets, they dusted off a lot of the sets, are still around. Those buildings were built to last, baby. I wish they had an opening like the map from Game of Thrones. But, hopefully they'll eventually have something like that. But anyway, they're like, it's the same map. I'm like, I don't care. I enjoyed seeing that map every week. Yeah, it was every week. We're back to this is another weekly release. But anyway, I liked binging it, to be honest with you. But I like binging The Boys, which I'm able to do as a critic. But you guys watch it week to week and you love it. So I think this should be fine week to week. But even though this is part of Game of Thrones, that means it has huge expectations to meet, but also deep disappointments from the final season of Game of Thrones to overcome. It's got problems in both directions, positive and negative. Now again, as I said, I really like this show. I think it's excellent, and I think it's strong enough and getting a head start on the Rings of Power and Andor, very similar shows, that it has to compete with, and I think it can compete with very well. I was on the live stream today and I was talking about how this was like Andor, and some of you were like, what? It's not like Andor. Yes, it's like, that's a space fantasy thing. But again, it's like conversations about who's in power, should they be in power, a lot of politicking, a lot of world building. It's like basically three versions of the same show on at the same time. So I think House of the Dragon is real lucky that it's coming out first. And I'm glad it's also coming out first because this show isn't going to hook you right away. And please, I know that today, we're, short attention span, very competitive field, but, it didn't always have to be that a show, although the first Game of Thrones hooked you right out of the gate. All right, so here's my thoughts on it. You just have to commit to watching the whole first season. Then you can decide if you don't want to watch season 2. Because it took me 3 episodes to feel Game of Thrones was back. I was like, wow, Game of Thrones is back. And 6 episodes, so 3 episodes to have that feeling, and then 6 episodes to be like, you know what? This is a darn good show in and of itself, on its own. And HBO knows that it takes 6 episodes because they gave 6 episodes to critics, but also said, please watch all 6. They especially said, make sure you watch 6 because that's really important to get the feel of the show. And they were right. And so you gotta at least stick through 6. I think you'll be hooked after 3. You might even be hooked earlier. But if you're not feeling it, you gotta at least get through 6 before you decide to bail. episode 1 is big on atmosphere and grandeur. The whole show is top notch, although I love watching screeners. Like in episode 6, they literally just cut to black and were like, dragon sequence missing. And I could hear it and I was like, oh man, it sounds really good. And then they had a really cool dramatic scene towards the end. They also didn't have the VFX for, so the screen was just black. And I'm excited to actually see it because when I saw the aftermath and realized what happened, I was like, damn, that's awesome. So, it was really cool. All right, so anyway, I think it was, because again, I couldn't see it. But, the VFX that I did see were excellent. Really, really strong. But it's lacking the shocking elements of the very first episode of Game of Thrones. I'm surprised they didn't realize that when they were making the show. I'm surprised they didn't watch the first episode of Game of Thrones and go, okay, what made everybody really sit up and take notice? And you know what elements those were. That was a very well-constructed first episode. And I think House of the Dragon is really focused on the slow burn of season 1, and it's not as strong out of the gate as I would personally like for the show to succeed, because I know how good it gets later on. Now, as they say in the show itself, the Seven Kingdoms are not at war, and in fact have known peace for quite some time. But what that means for the show is that there's not a lot of fighting. There's some fighting. The end of episode 3, when I was like, Game of Thrones is back, baby, that's because the end of that episode had a sequence that was very reminiscent of later episodes of Game of Thrones with a really cool extended battle sequence. And I was like, that's pretty sweet. And there are also plenty of dragons. Lots and lots of dragons, even baby dragons. The baby dragon actually maybe it was like a toddler, tween dragon, but it was adorable. And it made me laugh, actually, because I was like, that's adorable. There's dragon eggs all over the place. So I was like, those are pretty cool. I remember them from really early on in Game of Thrones, but it's nice to see them here, too. I liked the people who were the dragon trainers and keepers. It was great. I definitely felt I got enough dragons, and then some. And also every episode, they at least check the dragon box every episode. They know you want to see dragons. They know you promised. They know that you were promised dragons, and they deliver. But it's a bit more How to Train Your Dragon, like live action, than the flying nuclear warheads of Game of Thrones. There's a bit of that, and they certainly discuss that having dragons is like having weapons of mass destruction and the power that gives the House of Targaryen and their allies, but you don't get a lot of demonstrations of that. It's a lot of like, let's fly around on our dragons, but that's awesome. There's one shot where the dragon, I think it was episode 2, comes up through the clouds like Jaws, like doom, 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 and I was like, that's amazing. All right, so yes, House of the Dragon is more like Succession or The Crown. Oh, it's a lot like those shows, with lots of dramatic scenes of angling for power and what it means, not just to rule, but to be a lesser member of royal families. Spoiler alert, it sucks. There's a really great going theme where they're like, firstborn sons are given power, but secondborn sons have to take it. And I'm like, that's awesome, because it's true. And there's a lot of that on this show. And I love this kind of stuff. This is really interesting to me. And if that kind of story appeals to you as well. Succession and The Crown are quite successful, so I would hope that means that this would be really well liked as well. This is also a much faster and more aggressive Game of Thrones than I ever remember in the original show. Everybody wanted to sit on the throne, right? And it's here too, cutting the crap out of Paddy Considine. That's all I'll say, but I thought that was interesting. But, here, wow, I was like, this is pretty cutthroat, literally sometimes. Because Paddy Considine, speaking of him, plays a king stupid enough to be vulnerable, but not so stupid that he's easy to get rid of. This guy has 9 lives. There are also far more players in this Game of Thrones, which makes it very interesting. And the show moves through them very quickly. A combination of course, killing them off, because this is Game of Thrones, but also the characters age up very quickly and are replaced with different actors, sometimes after just a few episodes. And they don't really tell you that time is passing. So you're like, who's that? And you're like, oh, wait a minute. Is that character from last episode? They're older? Wow, how fast are we moving here? I think that's kind of how they get it across. I don't think it would kill them to put up a title card that says 4 years later, but they don't want to do it. Anyway, halfway through with episode 6, a number of the main characters, I guess that's their version of Ned Stark, What happened to Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. They're like, surprise! Now this character, a main character who spent 5 episodes with, is played by an entirely new character. That was unexpected. At least I didn't know they were going to do that, and I was a little jarring. Also because not every actor got rotated out as time passed. Like Matt Smith and Paddy Considine, they stayed the same, and Matt Smith he doesn't age at all. Paddy Considine, he got some pretty aggressive aging in episode 6. I was like, whoo. But so that inconsistency also made it weird. I was like, well, if you had to swap out those other actors, especially a lot of the actresses, why don't you swap out Matt Smith? And they were like, hello, it's Matt Smith. And I was like, touche. But I was getting attached to those other actresses. Anyway, since the 7 kingdoms are mostly at peace, as I said, the other way to play the Game of Thrones besides war is through marriage. And this is a very good way to make sure women are just as much involved in this game as men. And the show's commentary on marriage, I thought, during the Middle Ages and in royal families, is very interesting. As we know, you marry for political reasons, not love, but I think that's illustrated quite well here. And usually women in shows are always complaining about that. They're like, that sucks. But here they're like, yes, how can I fortify my line? And you're like, okay, it's like a business decision. So I thought that was, don't kid yourself. Some people today get married for business decisions, basically. But then also the idea of, exploring the idea that you have children to grow your not only for an heir, but to grow your numbers and increase your family's reach and influence. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. Fascinating. Also, I got to tell you, birthing children, particularly with medieval medicine, my goodness, it's plenty dangerous and deadly. I mean, that's all I'll say. But wow. There's a big blood budget on this show. There is, however, one problem I do have with this show, and it really sticks in my craw, because I like the show otherwise so much, but there's just one problem with it that's really hard and almost impossible to get over, and I'm curious to see how people react to it. Now, obviously, in real life, Marie Antoinette, for instance, was just 14 when she married her first cousin, right? And there are countless stories like that throughout history, particularly with royal families. And incest was a big part, at least with the Lannisters, in the Game of Thrones show, right? But here, and for a modern audience, I think there's way too much incest. I can't believe we're having this conversation. And talk of marrying children. I'm like, how far is too far? I think this show goes too far. For instance, when someone suggests that the princess be betrothed to her 3-year-old half-brother, I was like, don't like that. And then also, this is a princess, by the way, who let's just say has a way too friendly relationship with her uncle. And then also, this was the thing that really I thought was I can't believe that nobody on set was like, I don't think we should do this. There's a scene where Paddy Considine walks alongside, I kid you not, a 12-year-old actress to discuss their potential marriage. And they have a pretty frank discussion about it. I don't think that scene should have been on this show. And I think it does matter what you put out into the world. Recently, I watched Blackbird on Apple TV, and that's based on a true story where the pedophile murderer said that he justified attacking, raping, and killing underage girls because in olden days, 12 enough was old enough to be married. So I just do not, that's of course, unfortunately, historically accurate, but this is a fantasy show and it shouldn't be on this show. I would not have done that. I don't know how Paddy Considine felt even filming that. And there are a couple, I gotta tell you, there are some times where this show, I'm like, you're going a bit too far. All right, I'll be curious to see how everybody feels about it. Now, the biggest thing, story-wise, to make it a complete Game of Thrones experience that's missing from the first 5 episodes is a really good schemer, like Tyrion Lannister or Littlefinger. But thankfully, one blossoms in episode 6, played deliciously by Matthew Needham. And I think that's one of the reasons, besides the new cast members showing up, that they want you to watch through episode 6. Until then, though, don't worry, there's plenty of nudity, world building. There's no, I can't believe I have to even clarify this. There's no underage nudity, thank goodness. But anyway, there's world building. They shouldn't have done that. All right, world building, including revisiting a lot of old sets, as I said, from Game of Thrones from 172 years ago. A few very good fight scenes, dragons, tons of dragons, as I said, and setting the stage to keep you interested. Now, while the original Game of Thrones had a huge cast that made many a star, many of those actors became household names. But House of the Dragon doesn't focus so much on specific characters. Again, many actors only last a few episodes, but instead, and this was interesting, I hadn't expected this about this show. It's a little bit more like reading a history book. And like, for instance, in season 1, clearly it's going to span multiple generations in a single season. Like, you see a baby born in one episode, and then just a few episodes later, they're a teenager. You're like, wow, we're moving fast. But still, even though it's not really focused on the cast so much, these are some of my favorite members. Matt Smith is doing Matt Smith, right? But of course, he's very good at being Matt Smith. Nobody plays dissatisfied, arrogant nobleman quite like Matt Smith. And he does have a lot of sex scenes. That's one of the ways he advertised this show. He was like, do I have too many sex scenes? I don't know. I mean, I've only seen 6 episodes, but he certainly has the biggest, he's racking up the biggest count. I came to really like Millie Alcock as our new Targaryen dragon-riding princess, which never gets old. At first I was like, you're a Daenerys knockoff. But I felt she really came into her own for her 5 episodes. But I thought she did a very good job. But then again, in episode 6, she got replaced by Emma Darcy, who might do a great job, but at least in that one episode, she was greatly overshadowed by Olivia Cooke, who takes over for Emily Carey, who was doing a good job and got kicked out. But Paddy Considine and Matt Smith got to stay. Make it make sense. And I mean, ageism against women. But I mean, that's how it is. Does make sense, sadly. All right, but Olivia Cooke's excellent. I think she's shaping up to be kind of like a Cersei substitute, and I think she's very good. Rhys Ifans, always a treat. Always a treat. And Paddy Considine, he's not particularly compelling, to be honest with you, but he's not supposed to play a compelling character. He plays, it's a weird role, but he does it really well. He manages to hold everything together. Again, as a very weak king who's just savvy and stubborn enough and lucky enough to a degree. He's also very unlucky, as you'll see, to hold on to his crown. He's, in one scene, he's like, will they ever sing songs about me? And I was like, I don't know, your story's, I'm enjoying your story. It's pretty crazy, man. Game of Thrones, of course, always had really great supporting characters, as well as the leads. And here, Gavin Spokes and Fabien Frankel do really nice work. Plus, look, there's a Lannister. He hasn't done much yet, but I really liked seeing a Lannister. I was like, I know that house. Steve Toussaint looks very cool and leads the very powerful House of Valerian. But I'm surprised, and unfortunately not surprised, that House of the Dragon would make an effort to add diverse characters to their cast, something that Game of Thrones was criticized for, especially in its earlier seasons. Yet, 6 episodes in, has not treated them very well, for the most part. I'm like, why would you add these characters only to undercut them? Again, why did no one bring this up? And they all have such a cool look. They look so awesome that it just makes it all the more of a letdown that they aren't better used. Although, one Valerian has a very powerful scene in episode 6, and I can't wait to discuss it with you. It was great. So I'm all in for season 1, and because I'm willing to give House of the Dragon the benefit of the doubt and the time to build itself up to be a Game of Thrones level mega hit. I mean, it took Succession 3 seasons to become a mega hit, right? But House of the Dragon is far more expensive and has much bigger expectations because, of course, it's not supposed to be the new Game of Thrones. It has to be the new Game of Thrones. That's the whole reason for its existence. So we'll see if people are willing to be patient enough in today's ultra-competitive world of streaming. I'm curious, how many episodes do you plan to give this before you drop out? But I like it. I really like it. If you like Succession and The Crown, and if you liked Game of Thrones, I really like this show. I like it. So House of the Dragon debuts on HBO and HBO Max this Sunday, and be sure to come back for my breakdown. It's not so much, if you remember my Game of Thrones coverage, it will be like that. We're going to have a good time, and we're going to talk about episode 1, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see what everybody thinks. All right, share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.